Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight.
They're not vaccinated and they do not want to be tested.
Does Illinois' right of conscience law protect workers who defy government COVID mandates?
El Milagro workers have been working under harsh conditions for years.
Workers at El Milagro are back on the job after last week's walkout. We hear about their working conditions and the latest on their organizing efforts.
Clearing criminal records, the status of cannabis expungements following the legalization of recreational marijuana.
First, we will increase funding for homelessness prevention by 36%.
The mayor's 2022 budget proposal includes up to $214 million in affordable housing programs for Chicago's homeless population.
The discharge of a mysterious brown substance forces beach closures in the Indiana Dunes National Park.
A look at the impact extreme heat has on the health of outdoor workers as well as their earnings.
The business district in Fulton Market is booming, and the West Loop could be the next location for a metro station. That and more from Cranes.
And the Chicago Tennis Festival kicks off today. We talk with the host and learn about his mission to give kids opportunities to take part in a major tennis tournament. But first, some of today's top stories. Chicago R&B superstar R. Kelly is found guilty of racketeering in connection with sex trafficking, kidnapping, and bribery schemes involving underage girls over a period of many years. The verdict was read in a Brooklyn court today after 2 days of jury deliberations, and this is file footage of Kelly in Cook County Court. Kelly is also found guilty of a sex trafficking law called the Mann Act, which makes it illegal to transport anyone across state lines for immoral purposes.
To the victims in this case, your voices were heard and justice was finally served.
And Kelly faces up to 20 years in prison with sentencing scheduled for May 4th, and he's still facing similar federal charges here in the Northern District of Illinois as well as state charges in Cook County and in Minnesota. A former Chicago alderman pleads guilty to federal corruption charges of his own. Former 22nd Ward Alderman Ricardo Munoz entered the plea today to charges that he drained $16,000 from the bank account of City Council's Progressive Reform Caucus. Munoz allegedly used that money to pay for a relative's tuition, among other expenses. The plea agreement calls for a sentence of 10 to 16 months in custody and restitution of $6,000 to the Progressive Caucus Fund. Munoz served on City Council from 1993 all the way up until 2019. New data released by the FBI shows a 30% spike in homicides across the country last year. That's the largest single-year increase since the FBI started tracking those numbers in the 1960s. The report also says several large cities, including Chicago, did not release data. That said, the city finished last year with 771 homicides, and that was up about 64% from the year before. The city is on a similar pace this year. Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown spoke at Chicago City Club today and said it's hard to ascribe a single cause for the spike.
Too many illegally possessed guns in the wrong hands. Number two, we do want more significant consequences for violent offenders in our court system.
Former President and First Lady Barack and Michelle Obama are set to officially break ground on the Obama Presidential Center in Jackson Park. Earlier this evening, the former president touted the project in a virtual conversation with former campaign staffers. Governor Pritzker, Mayor Lightfoot, and other dignitaries are scheduled to be at that event tomorrow, as road closures and preliminary work on the site has already begun. The project is expected to cost upwards of $500 million and will have full coverage on tomorrow night's program. Up next, a look at one of the exemptions to vaccine requirements, so stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
President Joe Biden, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, each are using their authority to institute COVID vaccine mandates. Those who don't want to comply are pushing back, and they say they've got state law on their side. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. So Amanda, explain that for us.
Well, yeah, Paris, those mandates are beginning to kick in. Teachers, other school employees, as well as healthcare workers had to receive a first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine by September 19th or begin to undergo regular testing. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot is sticking by an October 15th deadline for city employees. But those that don't want to get the shot or be tested, they are counting on Illinois' right of conscience law as a potential out. That law states that it is the public policy of the state of Illinois to respect and protect the right of conscience of all persons who refuse to obtain, receive, or accept, or who are engaged in the delivery of, arrangement for, or payment of health care services and medical care. The ACLU of Illinois' Amory Clafetta says that Illinois has had a version of that on the books since the 70s. It was updated then in 1998 and again in 2016.
What it's really intended to do is to shield healthcare professionals from being sued or facing, a licensing removal or something of that nature if there is a healthcare service that they don't want to provide because of a religious or a conscience-based objection.
And typically that service would be an abortion when doctors don't want to perform one. There also have been court cases of pharmacists who don't want to fill prescriptions for, say, birth control or the morning after pill. Recently, a dozen or so Nauvoo-Calusa school teachers and staff members cited the right of conscience healthcare law as a reason for refusing to get the COVID vaccine, and they don't want to be tested for COVID. One individual writing to the superintendent, they believe in their own body's power to fight COVID and that a family member's prescription drug addiction makes them averse. I am proud to be a Viking, and in no way do I want to be forced to resign or get fired for not complying to these mandates. The letter reads, for these reasons I listed and my personal convictions, I respectfully decline to get the COVID-19 vaccine or participate in your weekly COVID-19 testing, as is my right granted to me under the Healthcare Right of Conscience Act.
The majority of the people I've talked to, majority of staff members says it's discrimination, because if the vaccinated people don't have to get tested, they feel like they shouldn't get tested because vaccinated people, they can spread COVID and they can have COVID. So some of them said if the entire staff got tested, then they would get tested as well.
But Superintendent Kent Young says his attorney advises him that universal testing is not allowed under Illinois' executive order. Now, the Nauvoo-Calusa School Board recently upheld conscientious objections as a reason that staff can refuse to get the vaccine or undergo testing. Nauvoo-Calusa also on probation with the state for refusing to abide by Governor Pritzker's mask mandate.
Yeah, it is challenging in certain aspects with the staff and especially community members and parents. And, the kids are always great. They were great last year. We required them to wear the mask properly, didn't have any issues. But starting last spring, people got tired of it, and there's a lot of information in social media. And so that started creating a problem.
The Illinois Fraternal Order of Police likewise looking to the Right of Conscience Act.
This law is there, and it seems to be pretty clear, and it seems to be gaining ground that this law does, in fact, apply directly to the vaccine mandates. And we really do believe there's a discrimination part of this law that will protect our members if they seek to get an exemption against the vaccines.
The ACLU's Clafetta says for workers, in this case, their patients in this scenario, to be using the law is a stretch. She says that the act was intended to look after healthcare providers.
What we're seeing now is a really unprecedented expansion or attempt to expand the protections of the law and really turning it on its head.
She envisions that in the near future, this issue could land in court.
And I think that would be up to the courts to determine how broadly to interpret this. It's also possible that in the meantime, the legislature could come back and amend the law potentially to narrow some of the terms that people are relying on to bring the law back to its original scope.
There's activity and talk about just that happening, and the legislature is set to return in late October, so lawmakers will have that opportunity. Now, as for the matter going to court, Fraternal Order of Police President Chris Southwood says that there is a, quote, very good chance that the FOP's largest local, and yes, that is Chicago, could serve as a test case. Now, the Illinois State Board of Education, meanwhile, is steadfast, responding to my request for comments on this matter with a statement saying that school personnel who decline both vaccination and testing must be excluded from the school premises. ISB says that any district that has questions about the Healthcare Right of Conscience Act should consult with their legal counsel. With that, back to you.
Amanda, I should add this happens as the local FOP, the Chicago FOP, announced today that it met with the city on that mandate, and nothing really came out of that meeting. They also announced today that their former president, Dean Angelo, is in the ICU with COVID. So our wishes to Mr. Angelo for a speedy recovery. And Amanda, thank you very much. And now to Brandis and the latest organizing efforts by employees at El Milagro. Brandis.
Paris, workers at the El Milagro tortilla factory are back on the job following a walkout last week. But the employees say they're still protesting poor working conditions, lack of adequate pay, and the company allegedly not following COVID guidelines. Workers say last year at least 85 people at the facility contracted COVID and 5 died. Joining us now with more is Jorge Mujica, the strategic campaigns organizer for Arise Chicago, a workers' rights group that's been organizing with the El Milagro workers. We also reached out to El Milagro for a representative, to hear back from a representative, and we haven't received a response just yet. Jorge, thank you for joining us. So what kind of conditions are workers dealing with there?
Well, there's a whole array, there's a full list of demands, but mostly 2 of them. There's not enough workers, and El Milagro, instead of increasing wages to attract new workers, because they are only offering $16 an hour, which is $1 above minimum wage, instead of raising the wages, what they are doing is raising the speed of the machines. And the workers complain that they have to put together tortilla packages every 1 second, so 60 packages per minute. And they say, you know, you can crank up the machines, but you can't increase our speed. That's inhumane. And the other one is temperatures. Of course, you know, this is a bakery after all, and they are working at 90, 95 degrees. And when they take their lunch, the lunch room doesn't have air conditioner either. So it's like taking your lunch at 100 degrees or 95 degrees. It's incredibly uncomfortable for them.
You and your workers, of course, you've been organizing around this. We know about the walkout that happened last week. What is the status of your organizing now?
We gave, or the workers gave, the company 7 days to respond to their demands. They are simply asking to sit down with management and talk about all these demands. And management so far has refused. I mean, they don't even want to talk to the workers. They say one by one you can go to human resources, but not as a group, not as a committee, which the workers have formed, elected a committee, and they are demanding the management just to sit down and talk. Management refuses.
So one of the concerns, as we mentioned, it's been around the COVID precautions and mitigations measures. We spoke with Luis Oliva earlier today about this. Here's what he said.
Ellos casimente solo les estaba importando su producción, nada de nosotros, porque no dijeron vamos a cerrar esta planta o vamos a parar el proceso o les vamos a aumentar de salario, porque están arriesgando su vida, sacándonos producción y tratando de que no pare de haber tortilla. Eso no lo miraron ellos, solo les estaba importando su proceso de tortilla, no nuestras vidas.
Jorge, has the company addressed how they've treated COVID precautions?
Yeah, they have improved some conditions. Certainly last year, there were almost criminal behavior. They did not allow anyone to use a face mask by the beginning of the pandemic, April, May last year. And that ended up with 5 deaths and 85 workers sick. Ever since, they are improving, but still, you know, these are essential workers in crowded conditions, and, you know, extreme precautions have to be taken.
So after the walkout last week, we know that workers were locked out of the factory for several hours. What happened?
Yes, indeed. Despite the fact that the workers gave a signed letter to management saying, we will come back to finish our shift as soon as our meeting is over, the company simply decided to shut down the plant and lock out the workers, leaving their purses, their car keys inside, their personal belongings. So the workers couldn't even go home. We had to call the police, and the police came, and the police forced management to allow the workers to walk in. And then the next day, we had another protest on Friday where we exposed this, and Human Resources finally said, we will pay you for the hours you lost yesterday. So it was a round, sound victory for the workers, but still, the demand is sit down and meet with us, and let's talk about the problems.
So, of course, there's also a concern over wages. What is the average worker at El Milagro making, and what is the controversy over the job listing new job postings?
Well, since we started organizing 2 months ago, the workers were making $15.40, $15.60, $16, and then El Milagro starts advertising jobs for $16. And the workers, with 10, 15, 20, and 30-year seniority are saying, how come you're going to pay new workers more than we are earning? And on top of that, we will have to train them. So that's not possible. El Milagro came back increasing some wages, but still in the very old style of personal evaluations. So I'll give you 10 cents, I'll give you 50 cents, I'll give you 80 cents. And what the workers are demanding is a fair scale, a starting salary, and then increases by seniority and by qualifications.
And on that note, here's Luis Oliva again talking about some of those demands that they're seeking.
Nosotros a la compañía le estamos pidiendo varios puntos. Número uno es que nos paguen el salario justo que debemos de ganar. Tal vez no solo yo, porque hay muchos compañeros aparte de mí que tienen varios años o tienen varias de toda su vida de estar trabajando con la compañía. Punto número dos, la compañía nos tiene que dar uniformes, porque no es deber de nosotros de comprarlo de nuestro mismo salario, que no los pagan lo justo, y todavía de ahí mismo tenemos que comprar nuestros uniformes para ir a trabajar a la planta. No es justo.
So Luis Oliva there, of course, he's speaking about the wages, the concern there as well, but also saying that he thinks the company should provide uniforms because there are restrictions and specifics about what they should be wearing. The company has sometimes had issues with those. What is next in terms, Jorge, of getting some of these demands met?
Putting pressure on the company. What the workers are saying is let's bring the community to talk to El Milagro, to call El Milagro. So they are making contact with politicians, they are making contact with faith leaders all around Chicagoland, and let's put pressure on the company. There's a petition online going on that already has, I think, 1,500 signatures in the last 2 or 3 days.
And Jorge, you all have, just before we go, you've given the company until Wednesday to respond. What happens if they miss that deadline?
At the end of the day, Wednesday. So any action the workers take would happen on Thursday. And we have several meetings this week to see what the different plans and different shifts want to do. It's up to them. We only educate, organize, and support workers. We don't decide for them.
Okay. Jorge Mujica, thank you so much for joining us. We'll keep watching.
Thank you.
An estimated 34,000 Illinoisans are still waiting to expunge their cannabis records, according to the Sentencing Policy Advisory Council. This after more than 2 years since the recreational cannabis law was legalized, or since recreational cannabis was legalized in this state. Part of that law created a pathway to clear a person's cannabis record. Joining us to discuss cannabis expungement and more are State Representative LaShawn Ford, a Democrat from the west side of Chicago, and Brandon Williams, supervising attorney at Cabrini Green Legal Aid. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. So, Brandon, let's start with you, please. Your office has been partnering with the state as part of the New Leaf Network to provide free legal counsel for those with cannabis-related offenses. Briefly walk us through sort of the process of clearing cannabis from someone's record.
Sure. Thank you for having me here today. So we are part of an organization called New Leaf, Illinois, which comprises about 20 different community organizations or legal aid organizations to assist with expungement for cannabis records. And so part of the process is automatic. So if a person just has a minor cannabis arrest, those are going to be automatically expunged. If you have a conviction, meaning you were sentenced, then those have to be either done by the governor through a pardon or by the state's attorney by filing a motion in court, or a person themselves can file their own motion in court to have their cannabis conviction vacated and expunged.
Have you seen much progress in the amount of cases that are being reviewed across the state?
Absolutely. I think as of about 3 months ago, there have been about 500,000 cannabis arrests and convictions that have been expunged. However, there's still a large number of conviction arrests that are still out there that have not been processed as of yet.
Representative Ford, do you think there's enough transparency within the legal system when having a cannabis case expunged?
No, Brandon, thank you so very much for this opportunity. I don't think that we have enough outreach, but I think transparency is there. The state has spent $1.6 million right now to hire 20 organizations that's helping get the word out. And when I talk to Mr. Williams, he tells me that people in the north, and that is the city of Chicago, they don't know about this help that's available. But people in the rural parts of Illinois, they are aware and they're taking advantage of it. But as he said, Brandon, over 500,000 records have been automatically expunged from the records. That's over 318,000 people, individuals' lives that have changed as a result of this law.
And just to clarify, Representative Ford, you believe it sounds like there's a disconnect between getting the information to some folks here in the city who might need their records expunged versus those maybe in the suburbs or more rural areas.
Yes, Mr. Williams tells me that we have to do more, and we've committed to working together to make sure that the message is out, because people may be a little confused. They may have thought that the convictions were automatically expunged, but it is the records, not the convictions. So we're getting the word out, and we're going to try to increase the money that's used for legal aid for people.
And Brandon, from your perspective, are there very lengthy waiting times for people who are waiting to get their cases reviewed?
It kind of depends on where they were arrested at. So most convictions have to be expunged in the area that they were arrested in. So it may take a little longer in the city of Chicago to get that record processed, and it may be faster in the suburbs or in the other locations throughout the state of Illinois, just depending on the staffing in the clerk's office.
About how long are we talking about?
So it just really depends. Like if you need to go through the normal petition to expunge process, it can take about 4 to 6 months on average. In the city of Chicago right now, there is a huge backlog, and all the parties are working to get through that backlog. So it may take over a year to actually get a hearing date and get those expungements processed.
Representative Ford, part of this law passed in 2019, it came with the intent of creating diversity in the state's cannabis industry. Do you think this law has lived up to its promise?
It has increased diversity there, but it hasn't lived up to the true intent. No, it hasn't. And we're going to do everything. I'm going to fight until we can get as much diversity in this state as relates to cannabis businesses for communities that's been hardest hit and families that's been destroyed because of cannabis.
And Brandon Williams, same question to you. Do you think this law has lived up to its promise?
Not quite yet. There's a lot of work to be done. I think one of the biggest steps is for the people to be aware that these services are available, and then taking that step to call or to go to the website at newleafillinois.org or call 855-963-9532 to get the process started.
And what are some of the challenges for people who need to go through that process? There's a cost associated with expungement usually. What are some of the challenges, Brandon?
So some of the challenges are, cannabis may just be one conviction or arrest on their record. A lot of people are going to have a lot of other convictions or arrests. But the great thing is that we just don't help with the cannabis arrest or conviction. We try to get their whole criminal record expunged or sealed. And so the cost to speak and get assistance from an attorney, for the most part, is free. There are filing fees, but there is what's called a 298 waiver, where people can apply to get all the court fees and costs waived. That option is available to them.
Sounds like it helps, though, to have somebody kind of walk you through that if you're not very familiar with it. Representative Ford, what more do you believe needs to be done to help the communities that have been hit hardest by the war on drugs?
I think we have to intensify the funding. We're only spending $1.6 million to provide legal aid. I mean, there should be public service announcements to let people know that help is available. And we need to make sure that we work with the courts so that we provide them with the resources to deal with the backlog. But I have to give the state police and the state's attorneys and the courts a great deal of respect for working together to clear all of these convictions, and the governor for being committed to that.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to Representative LaShawn Ford and Brandon Williams for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, serving tennis on Chicago's South Side. Stay with us.
I come from a people that not only found a way to survive through the most horrific circumstances, but they thrived.
I could not save one of the boys of color in my own life. If my family could be exposed to this horror, then really it could happen to anyone. We are truly all in this together.
There's much more ahead on the show, including a look at a new program to address homelessness. But first, if you're a tennis fan, you have the opportunity to catch some top professionals in Chicago this week. The Chicago Tennis Festival kicked off today, and Chicago Tonight's Joan Hernandez went to meet the promoter and founder of a tennis facility on the South Side to learn more about his mission to give kids an opportunity to thrive.
A lot of pros on tour now talk about how they were bald kids for Roger Federer, right? And that made them believe they could do it. Say, oh, it doesn't look that hard, right? So I think that sort of see it to be it.
On the court, Kamal Murray is known as a tennis dad to kids who are part of the XS and Education Foundation program.
Tennis dad to many, right? I mean, my phone blows up all times of the night. It's a rewarding experience to have been able to touch so many people in a very deep and long-lasting way.
Murray coached Sloane Stevens to the 2017 U.S. Open Championship.
Wow, what a moment.
26-year-old Odesawa Osibuhan has been under Murray's wing since she was 12 years old.
My mom found him. I had, I don't know if you guys know this reference, but it's called a chicken wing forehand. Looks like this. And Kamal fixed it for me, and he got me to top 10 in the country. And I got a full scholarship, and I finished getting my degree from Northern Illinois in health sciences.
Osibuhan is now a coach at XS Tennis, a massive indoor and outdoor facility on the South Side.
I wouldn't be where I am right now if no one else gave back to me. So this is home for me. I feel like I need to be a part of it, and I love it. I still love it.
Murray has taken his years of professional coaching experience and used it to open XS Tennis, a program aimed at giving inner-city kids access to the sport.
If you talk to the best players in the game, their stories are all the same. I grew up across the street from a tennis club, and I think that I wanted to give black and brown kids that same opportunity to say, I grew up across the street from a tennis court, I stumbled upon it, I fell in love, I got good, I made a career out of it.
Providing kids with once-in-a-lifetime opportunities to meet champions like Venus Williams for a clinic. Murray says he wants the center to be a safe haven for the community, a place where students can grow and thrive, not only on the court, but academically.
To have an entire university or athletic department watching your GPA, free tutoring, I think that is an experience that will set more black and brown kids up to not only access college, but also complete college.
Coach Murray continues to break barriers, becoming the first African American to promote a pro tennis tournament in Chicago, giving youngsters the chance to participate as ball kids and watch pro players up close and personal.
I think this is a good opportunity for them to see that, oh, it looks harder on TV than it actually is if I commit to the process and stay disciplined and keep going.
The Chicago Tennis Festival consists of 3 Women's Tennis Association tournaments. Proceeds from the event will go to benefit the foundation.
Though tennis is an expensive sport, we have scholarship programs for the kids that can't afford it. Our doors are open to everyone.
A door that Osibuhan took advantage of and says has put her on the path to success, hoping to encourage generations of kids to dream big.
For them to see that, professional tennis is something that is, exceeding to the minds of kids, be like, maybe I can do this, maybe.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
And the tournament will be held all week long. If you're interested in finding out more, including how to get tickets, you can visit our website. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, it may be more expensive to heat your home this winter. That and more in headlines from Crane Chicago Business. Indiana Dunes National Park closes all of its beaches after the discharge of a mysterious brown substance in the water. How Chicago's homeless population might benefit from the mayor's 2022 budget proposal. And a new report draws attention to the impact extreme heat has on outdoor workers, both physically and financially. But first, some more of today's top stories. A federal jury has found R. Kelly guilty of racketeering charges in Brooklyn. The former R&B superstar faced one count of racketeering with 14 underlying acts that included sexual exploitation of a child, kidnapping, bribery, as well as 8 additional counts of violating a sex trafficking law called the Mann Act. The New York jury deliberated for just under 2 days. Prosecutors labeled Kelly a serial predator and credit his victims with speaking up to reach this verdict. A 26-year-old Calumet City man accused of shooting a Chicago police officer is being held without bail today, facing several charges, including attempted murder. Chicago police say Aaron Jenkins fired his gun in the direction of 2 police officers, striking a 30-year-old officer several times in the leg as she got out of her squad car. The officer and her partner were responding to a report of shots fired just before 11 Friday night in the South Shore neighborhood. The officer was treated and released from a local hospital. She was among 60 people shot over the weekend, including 8 fatally. A school community on the west side is mourning the loss of 2 parents to COVID-19. Teachers and families placed roses on 2 chairs outside Jensen Miller Scholastic Academy today in remembrance of the 2 mothers, one of a 5th grader and another of an 8th grader, both of whom died last week. In the last 2 weeks, the school has had 8 confirmed cases in the building and more than 200 close contacts, pushing half of the school into quarantine and remote learning. Teachers greeted several students as certain classrooms were able to return today from quarantine, others returning this week and next. In a statement, CPS says there's no evidence of in-school transmission of COVID-19 to students at Jensen Elementary. The district says it has partnered with Lurie Children's Hospital to begin offering COVID-19 testing on site to all students and staff during the school day, as well as providing crisis support. And the sky will be meeting the sun in Connecticut. No, that's not a riddle. That is where the first game of the WNBA semifinals is happening, with the 6th-seeded Chicago Sky playing against top-seeded Connecticut Sun. The Sun closed the regular season on a 14-game winning streak. The first 2 games are in Connecticut, then Candace Parker and the Sky bring it to Chicago for 2 games in this best-of-5 series. And now to Paris for some of today's top business headlines. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. Fulton Market could be home to the next metro station in Chicago as the business district there booms. A former Target turned community center on the city's south side sells for more than $20 million. And the cost Chicago area households pay to heat their homes this winter is likely to skyrocket. Here to go behind the business headlines is Crane Chicago business reporter Danny Ecker. Danny, great to see you as always. So, city officials set to talk with Metro about a possible station in Fulton Market. Why there?
Well, Fulton Market just keeps getting bigger, more companies locating there, and it keeps expanding west, many blocks west of Google and McDonald's and the heart of the neighborhood. This is something that's been discussed now for several years. Developers have wanted it, saying, look, we're going to have tens of thousands of people coming into this neighborhood daily or multiple times a week, and they need a metro station to get there. It's very difficult to get to Fulton Market from Union Station or from Ogilvie. So Metro and city officials are going to have a virtual meeting next month to discuss plans for a new station. It'll likely be one around Ashland Avenue. This will all be very expensive and take years to do, but this will be the most public discussion we've heard to date about an actual metro station going there.
probably very short commute from Ogilvie Station there. All right, the second story here. A venture group based in New York recently bought the Blue Cross and Blue Shield multi-purpose center on the city's south side at a cost of about $20 million. And that building, of course, is a revamped Target. So what could this mean for investment down around there?
Well, it's great news. This was a former Target, like you said, in Morgan Park that was shuttered, and a group called DL3 Realty, which has been one of the most active developers in the South Side, bought it, and they signed a deal with Blue Cross and Blue Shield to open a community center, basically, in the building. And it's just sold and netted DL3 what appears to be a pretty nice profit. And that matters because one of the most significant issues for development in these neighborhoods has been that investors really have a hard time seeing these things make financial sense for them. So obviously a deal like this one stands out as an example of what can be done. Certainly it's not every day that you get a big company signing a 10-year lease like this, but a big deal, profitable deal in Morgan Park. It's great news for development in disinvested communities.
Certainly promising for that community. And finally, gas bills are expected to skyrocket this winter. Grown. How much and why?
Well, the price of natural gas is actually at its highest level since 2008. So gas utilities in the area are saying that heating bills this winter from November through March are going to be 35 to 50% higher than they were last winter. That means for the average Chicago household, that's about $188 per month compared with $139 a month last year. This is something that's actually been expected. Utility companies have spent a lot of money on infrastructure upgrades, and that's kind of been offset by low gas prices, and those are now starting to go away. So it's just going to, you have to get used to paying a little bit more to stay warm this year.
Yeah, of course, there's that multi-year massive main replacement program going on with People's Gas in the city right now. All right, Danny Ecker, thank you so much.
All right, thanks a lot.
And now, Brandis, we turn back to you.
Paris, thank you. A rusty-colored discharge from a U.S. steel plant has forced the shutdown of beaches in the Indiana Dunes National Park and prompted at least one local water treatment plant to close. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us now with more. So, Patty, what do we know about this mysterious substance that's been discharged into the waterway around Portage?
Right. So we know that it has been traced to U.S. Steel, which after a preliminary inspection, they said that it's pointing to an issue with their own wastewater treatment line. At least that's their best guess at this point. The Indiana Department of Environmental Management is running point on this investigation, and they've been taking samples. Last we heard, they didn't have any results back in terms of what exactly the chemical composition might be of what's being discharged. So we're still waiting for updates on that.
And what have we heard from U.S. Steel yet?
They're, again, also taking part in this investigation. So, they think they might know what the source is. What we can say right now is that it doesn't seem to be similar to a spill that took place in 2019 where thousands of fish died. There was a cyanide, I believe, amongst other chemicals. So far, the environmental officials are saying that their staff has not seen any incidents of fish or wildlife being killed at this point.
And Patty, before we let you go, any other implications besides the beach closure?
Well, there was one of the water treatment plants shut down because out of an abundance of caution because they take water in from the lake at that point. So far, it hasn't impacted any service to customers because they've been able to have enough capacity at one of their other treatment plants. But again, we'll see how long this plays out and how quickly we're able to find out what the problem is and how serious it is.
Okay, Patty Wetley, thank you so much for the story.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. And now, Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Mayor Lori Lightfoot's 2022 budget proposal includes money for Chicago's homeless, with funding coming from the American Rescue Plan federal stimulus package. The city's effort would include up to $214 million in housing assistance. And tonight, as part of our Firsthand Living in Poverty series, we take a look at how that money would be allocated. Joining us to discuss homelessness assistance in the 2022 budget proposal is Doug Schenkelberg, who is Executive Director of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. We invited a representative from the mayor's office to join us tonight, but they were unavailable. Doug, we appreciate you being here with us.
Happy to be here.
All right, so your reaction to that $214 million number out of the budget to combat homelessness?
So we, along with other organizations and aldermen, we're actively advocating for part of the American Rescue Plan to go towards addressing homelessness, as well as a host of other community needs. We felt it was the right thing to do to support communities and to address the issue of homelessness in the city of Chicago. There's roughly 58,000 people experiencing homelessness in Chicago. Those are people on the street, in the shelter system, and living doubled up. And that number is from before the pandemic hit, so we know it's even worse now. So we're happy to see that that advocacy has resulted in a significant increase in funding to address homelessness through affordable housing services.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask if you could give us a rundown of specifically what programs this money goes to.
So the line items included in the budget include money for permanent supportive housing, which is long-term housing with services to address people's needs when they are coming out of homelessness. And this is both for what would be traditional permanent supportive housing, as well as converting unused hotels to permanent supportive housing. There'll also be $20 million in short-term rental subsidies that move people into short-term housing until they can move into permanent housing. Money for infrastructure to make our shelter system non-congregate settings. Money for behavioral health services. There's also money in the budget for to address gender-based violence, which includes addressing housing and other services. So there's a variety of aspects of homelessness that are addressed.
A lot of different programs. And let's hear what Mayor Lightfoot said during her budget address on this issue and how it relates to violence in the city. Take a look.
In addition to violence prevention, this budget also prioritizes homelessness, affordable housing, with new dollars to address the needs of Chicago's most vulnerable residents. And first, we will increase funding for homelessness prevention by 36%, infusing $5 million into our flexible housing pools to support individuals who are frequent users of crisis systems, such as emergency rooms and shelters, and then connect them with supportive housing.
All right, so there's a boost in funding in this budget for some of these services because of that federal stimulus money that came in. So what happens in the next few years when there are no federal dollars like there have been the last couple of years?
That's exactly the question to be asking. And while we're encouraged by the use of this funding for the fiscal year 22 budget, we're really concerned about what happens after that. And so we have been advocating for long-term dedicated funding to address homelessness for a couple of years now through our Bring Chicago Home campaign. And so we think this initial investment can be a springboard to continuing that investment through a long-term funding stream that can not only sustain it, but increase it over the next several years.
And I think at the top you mentioned the city's homeless population is probably north of 58,000 now because of the pandemic. How much do you think a package like this could bring that number down and get people into houses or in some kind of housing?
So, I mean, what the mayor has proposed in the budget, our estimate is between the short-term rental subsidies and the permanent housing dollars put in the budget, we're looking at roughly between 1,500 to 1,800 people housed with this funding, which is a start, but it's not nearly enough given the total number of people experiencing homelessness. If we went with the Bring Chicago Home campaign and a long-term funding stream, we feel like we can serve 45,000 people over a 10-year period. So this initial investment is a great start, but we need money over the long term to really address the problem.
Right, so this sounds like a pretty small percentage of the entire homeless population in the city of Chicago. So ideally, what could bring that number down even further? What does the city need to do?
Well, the city needs to use its ability to change one tax that's out there, the real estate transfer tax, which is a tax that's paid when properties are bought and sold in the city of Chicago, and take it from a flat tax to a progressive tax. We're proposing a change that would increase the tax on properties sold over $1 million. The mayor backed that plan when she was a candidate, and then backed away from that when she became mayor. Our hope is that she would get back on board with that plan. And with that plan, you can generate close to $100 million a year in new revenue each and every year. And that can all be put towards addressing affordable housing and homelessness in the city of Chicago.
Right,
and have a real measurable impact.
Certainly been a tug of war on the debate over that tax. Very quickly, this budget also included $31 million for a universal basic income pilot program for some of Chicago's neediest families. Your reaction to that and how that might connect with the issue of homelessness?
Well, it's critical because, and I applaud it being in the budget, and I applaud Alderman Villegas for his championing that issue over the past couple of years. I think it's really important to provide people with basic flexible income that can provide a foundation to meet whatever need they have. I think what's great about universal basic income programs is that it's not focusing on one particular type of spending. It gives people flexibility to use the money as they need. And for someone experiencing homelessness, that would allow them to pay rent, to address utilities, to address other basic needs in their lives. So not only is housing in and of itself really critical, it's having cash in your life to address all the needs. So we hope the pilot's successful and they use good, solid best practices from across the country to implement.
Right, we'll watch to see how that goes and whether or not it gets passed in its current form, because City Council is still debating the budget. All right, Doug Schenkelberg, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And up next, a new report breaks down the impacts of extreme heat on health and earnings. That's a conversation from this weekend's Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, hosted by WBEZ host and reporter Araceli Gomez Aldana. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Temperatures have been reaching record-breaking levels across the country, affecting working conditions for farmers, those in construction, and even delivery workers. The Biden administration recently launched a plan with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to protect workers and communities from extreme heat. According to the White House, OSHA will develop a workplace heat standard. Joining us to discuss how rising temperatures are impacting the lives of outdoor workers and more are Rigoberto Campos, day labor organizer at the Latino Union of Chicago, and Dr. Christina Dahl, senior climate scientist for the Climate and Energy Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Christina, we'll start with you. You co-authored a study that draws attention to extreme heat affecting U.S. outdoor workers. What does the research say about hazardous heat conditions, and are these conditionings worsening in our area?
Sure. So we had done some research a couple of years ago that found that the frequency and the severity of extreme heat are poised to increase really dramatically between now and the middle of the century with continued climate change. We know that outdoor workers are among the people in our society who are the most exposed to extreme heat. So we wanted to understand how climate change could affect the livelihoods of outdoor workers in the future. What we found was really surprising. We found that between now and the middle of the century, outdoor workers could lose $55 billion per year on average because of lost work time due to extreme heat.
And Rigoberto, who do you see being most at risk when it comes to working outside in the extreme heat? I mean, Dr. Christina Dahl just explained some of the conditions that her research found.
Yeah, I would definitely put day laborers in that category. I think pretty much anyone also working in the Southwest or in any other coastal states. But the reality is that day laborers go through conditions where, on the one hand, you're going through extreme heat conditions when you're at work and sometimes at the abuse of an employer. But you also go to that sometimes if you don't have cooling systems at home. And so you're kind of going through both those conditions in your own habitat and in the workplace.
So no relief there. That's concerning. Christina, part of your study states that outdoor workers in Illinois are projected to face nearly $1.9 billion, you mentioned, in annual earnings, and that's at risk due to extreme heat. Cook, Will, and DuPage counties being hit the hardest. Why is that?
Yeah, so when we look at where outdoor work is happening across the United States, we see a couple patterns. And one is that when you have an urban area like Chicago, you tend to have a lot more people living there. And so you have a high number, relatively, of people working outdoors. But if you look at more rural areas, you have a greater percentage of the population working outdoors. And that means that outdoor work is constituting a greater proportion of that area's economy. So in terms of the number of people exposed to extreme heat, we will see more people exposed to extreme heat in urban areas. But when we look at the impacts of extreme heat on a local economy, it's really those more rural areas where you have a greater proportion of people working outdoors where we see some of the greatest risks.
Interesting. Earlier, we spoke with Esperanza Gonzalez from the Illinois Migrant Council, who works and trains farm workers in the field on heat prevention safety. Take a listen.
They need to take breaks. They need to drink plenty of water. They need to know the symptoms of heat stress, heat stroke. They need to know what to do. They need to have somebody there with a phone to call 911 if they need to. They need to drink plenty of water. They need to keep hydrated at all times. So it's been a challenge, though, let me tell you, because a lot of people don't know that the harms that heat can do to them. They don't know that heat can kill them.
So, Rigoberto, we're hearing these conditions. When it comes to improving some of these working conditions and creating awareness, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen?
Yeah, honestly, it's definitely getting day laborers access to information. I think oftentimes they do have their own channels through which they get information, and we engage them in that regard, but access is definitely one of them. I think definitely kind of having those relationships with community healthcare clinics that can kind of facilitate not just the access part, but the awareness around what could happen if you're not taking care of yourself on the job or in general. I think it's also one of those things, and we have conversations along those lines. But generally speaking, challenges I think also come down to the fact that sometimes we need workers to kind of voice what's going on the job, and so that we know how to appropriately answer. And sometimes they're scared to kind of bring those comments up because fear of retribution.
And Cristina, what do you think? What do you see as hurdles to creating better working conditions for these workers?
So the things that workers need when it comes to extreme heat are really fairly simple. It's water, shade, and rest. And with those three things, we can prevent the majority of heat-related illnesses and deaths in our country. I live in California, where we've had a heat health standard for outdoor workers for several years now. And when that standard was being developed, there was a lot of opposition from employers who thought that providing this water and the rest time and the breaks that their employees need would be really costly. But what we're seeing now, with that policy has been in place for a while, is that while it's not being perfectly enforced, we are seeing a decrease in the number of heat-related illnesses on the job. So that's encouraging, and that's happening at a much lower expense than employers anticipated. So we do expect that as the Biden administration and OSHA are trying to create this heat health standard that would apply nationally, it's likely that there will be pushback from employers, but we can look to places like California that have had a standard in place and see the very clear benefits that have resulted from that standard.
Rigoberto, what protections or standards would you like to see in places either by employers or by the Biden administration, as Cristina has mentioned?
Well, as I reviewed the proposal, I think in practice, I think it's a good step. In terms of what we know the conditions are on the ground, I think for workers to feel the effects and have confidence in the proposal, should it be practiced, I think the reality is that it's enforcement and consistency. Workers often feel like they're not supported, and that's typically where we step in. But we also kind of rely on the law and the enforcement of a lot of OSHA and a lot of the fair labor standards that day laborers are able to utilize to push back.
Yes, thank you so much. Our thanks to Rigoberto Campos and Christina Dahl for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. How a vote on the debt ceiling could impact social services like SNAP.
And how researchers are mimicking the mechanics of the mantis shrimp at the Shedd Aquarium. And join me tonight for our Chicago Tonight Black Voices virtual community conversation. We're talking about the role Chicago's Pullman neighborhood played in American history, including the labor and civil rights movements. Now that's right after the show at 8 p.m. You can join by visiting WTTW.com/events. Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.